It's strange how quickly your life can feel like it's slipping away when you're constantly stuck in someone else's version of what it should be. That's what I felt every time I visited my parents. They never really stopped treating me like the daughter they could control. I'm not saying they didn't love me. They did. But love for them meant making sure I was the responsible one, the one who had to shoulder everything their worries, their expectations, and especially the things my younger brother couldn't be bothered with. I'm 28 and I've spent most of my adult life trying to stay afloat, working hard in a decent job, living in a small apartment, just trying to carve out my own space. I don't have the luxury of time or money to waste. But every time I came home, it felt like I was falling back into this weird role where I had to pick up the slack for everyone else. My brother Sean is 22, 3 years younger, and he's been at university for what seems like forever. But honestly, I'm not sure he even tries to be a student. It's like he shows up for class because it's expected of him, and then goes back to playing video games and going out with friends. Sean isn't bad, not in the traditional sense. He's just lazy. My parents didn't see it that way, though. They were always talking about his potential, telling everyone that he was going to do great things one day. "He's just going through a rough patch," my mom would say, her voice full of that hopeful tone she always used when she believed her dreams for him could somehow be reality. I always had a sinking feeling in my stomach whenever she said that. Maybe it was because I knew I would end up being the one to clean up his mess when he didn't do what he was supposed to. I didn't mind helping out when I could. After all, I was the oldest, and that meant I had the responsibility. But the thing was, I'd already paid for Sean's college tuition once, not because I had to, but because it was just easier. My parents had told me that they couldn't afford it, and Sean had begged me, looking at me with those puppy dog eyes like he knew exactly how to manipulate me. I was stupid enough to believe him, and I wrote the check. I thought, at the time, that maybe paying for his first year would motivate him to get his act together. But it didn't. It just gave him another excuse to be lazy. By the end of that year, he hadn't even passed half his classes. I didn't say anything about it. I didn't confront him, and I didn't even mention it to my parents. I guess I wanted to believe that he'd figure it out, that it was just a bump in the road, but I could tell the longer it went on, the less he cared. My parents never held him accountable. Instead, they made excuses for him. It was always, "He's struggling, it's a hard time for him." I watched them feed into this idea that he was somehow fragile, that he couldn't be expected to do anything without their constant support. And every time they asked me for help, I did it because I didn't have the heart to say no. But it was never just money. It was always this quiet pressure, this expectation that I'd be the one to pick up the pieces. It wasn't overt, but it was there, lingering in every conversation, every suggestion that I was the good daughter, the mature one. That's how they saw me, always willing to sacrifice, always the one who would make sure everything worked out. And I did because I thought it was my duty. But the truth was, every time I did it, it felt less like an act of love and more like an obligation that I couldn't escape from. I'd been home for a family dinner a few weeks ago when it really started to hit me. Sean had been bragging about his latest semester grades, nothing to write home about, but he made sure to tell my parents how hard he was working this year. They ate it up. My mom looked at me and said, "You should be proud of your brother. He's going places. I just know it." I wanted to scream, but I just smiled, because that's what I always did when my family didn't see the truth. But deep down, I felt the resentment building. It wasn't just that Sean didn't deserve the help he was getting. It was that my parents thought I owed him, that I owed the family. It wasn't fair, and yet it was always expected of me. The more I thought about it, the more it felt like I was a backup for every time they couldn't fix their own messes. I wasn't my own person in their eyes. I was just their safety net, their last resort. That night, as I left their house and walked back to my car, I realized something. I was done. I had done enough. And when they needed me next, I wasn't going to be there to save them anymore. "Are you going to leave so soon?" my mom called out from the doorway, her voice soft and worried. "Yeah, I replied, keeping my back to her. I've got work early tomorrow. Well, you know you're always welcome here, she added. You're always welcome to help your brother too, if you want. I didn't even turn around. I just got in the car and drove off, the weight of it all hanging heavy in the air. It started off like any other family dinner, but something in the air felt off that night. I could tell just by the way my mom was smiling too brightly and the way my dad kept glancing at me that they were about to drop something heavy on me. I could already feel the tension rising, but I wasn't prepared for the words that were coming. My brother Sean was sprawled on the couch, his face lit up by the glow of his phone screen, not even bothering to look up when I walked in. He was like that most of the time, absent, detached, always focused on whatever distracted him. I couldn't help but feel that familiar frustration bubble up inside me as I passed by him. Mom had made all his favorite foods, of course, just the way he liked it, with extra portions and more dessert. It was like he could do no wrong in her eyes. I sat down at the table, my parents already in the middle of their conversation. It wasn't long before the inevitable happened. My mom cleared her throat and looked at me with that "I've got something important to say" expression. "So," she started, glancing over at Sean, who finally looked up from his phone with a lazy smirk on his face. "Your brother has some big news." I raised an eyebrow. "What now?" I asked, already knowing where this was going. "We've been talking," my dad chimed in, "and we think Sean could use some help with his tuition this year." I stared at them, my stomach tightening. "I thought we already paid for that last year," I said slowly, keeping my voice even. "You said he needed help, so I gave him the money." My mom waved her hand dismissively, like my payment was some forgotten detail. "Well, that was last year. This year's different. Sean's struggling, you know. He's trying really hard to stay focused." I glanced at Sean, who was now lounging back with his feet up on the table, acting like he didn't have a care in the world. "Struggling?" I repeated, the edge in my voice sharper than I intended. "He didn't even pass half his classes last year. What exactly is he struggling with?" Sean rolled his eyes at me, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, I don't know. Maybe I'm just having a hard time getting my stuff together, okay?" "Maybe if you tried," I muttered under my breath, not even sure I was talking to him or just venting my frustration. Mom ignored me, as usual. "The point is, we were thinking you could help him out again," she said, smiling at me with that fake sweetness she always used when she was trying to guilt-trip me into something. I froze. My heart dropped in my chest as I looked at my parents. I'd already done this. I had already paid for him. And now they were asking me to do it again? "No," I said firmly before I could even think about it. "I'm not paying for his tuition again. It's not my responsibility." My mom's expression shifted, but she quickly recovered, her smile still in place, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Well, you know, as the older daughter, I thought you'd want to help your brother out. He's family, after all." "You've got to be kidding me," I snapped, my voice rising now. "He's not a little kid. He needs to grow up and take responsibility for himself. I'm not doing it anymore." Sean, clearly irritated by my refusal, suddenly shot up from the couch, his tone hostile. "It's not like I'm asking you for charity, you know. I'm trying to build a future here, but all you ever do is act like you know what's best for me. Maybe I don't need your help, but I need my family to back me up. Maybe if you actually cared—" "I did care," I interrupted, feeling the anger bubbling over. "I paid for your tuition last year, and you failed. You're the one who wasted it. I'm not doing it again." My mom's face hardened, her voice taking on a warning edge. "This isn't about what you've done or haven't done. This is about what's right. You're his sister. You're supposed to support him." "You can't be serious," I shot back, my hands gripping the edge of the table, trying to keep myself from standing up and walking out. "What's right is letting him learn from his mistakes, not coddling him." Dad, who had been sitting quietly up until this point, finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "Your mother's right, you know. Family helps family. You can't just abandon him." I stared at him, the words hitting me like a slap. "Abandon him? I've already given him everything. How many times do I have to bail him out?" Mom's face flushed with frustration, her voice rising as she retorted, "It's not about bailing him out, it's about being there for him when he needs us." Her eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment I felt like I was being suffocated by her expectations. "You don't want to be the bad daughter, do you?" The words hit me like a ton of bricks. It wasn't about tuition. It wasn't even about Sean's future. It was about the fact that I was the one always expected to be the one to fix things. I was the one who had to carry the weight when Sean refused to do anything for himself. And now, once again, my parents were using guilt to force me to pick up the slack. I pushed my chair back, standing up before I could say anything I'd regret. "I'm not doing this. Not again." I turned and walked toward the door, not looking back. My heart was pounding in my chest, a mix of rage and hurt. "Where are you going?" Mom called after me, her voice frantic now. "I'm done," I said without turning around. "Figure it out yourselves." I heard her call my name again, but I didn't stop. I just needed to get out of there before I said something I couldn't take back. The next few days after the dinner were a blur. The moment I left my parents' house, I thought I would feel some kind of relief, like I'd finally stood up for myself, finally drawn the line. But it didn't work out that way. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard my mother's voice, the way she had said, "You don't want to be the bad daughter, do you?" It echoed in my head, twisting, making me question if I was doing the right thing. I had no idea what was coming next. That evening, I sat on my couch, my phone in hand, scrolling aimlessly, trying to distract myself. But no matter how hard I tried, the thoughts kept creeping back in. Sean wasn't the problem. It was my parents. They didn't care about his future. They just wanted to keep coddling him because it made them feel like good parents. They didn't care that he wasn't trying. They didn't care that I'd already given him everything I had. All they cared about was what made them look good in front of others, how well their kids were doing, how much they could brag about their family's accomplishments. And then came the texts. It started with my mom, of course. "I think you need to rethink what you said today," she wrote. "You don't want to ruin the family, do you? Don't be selfish. Sean needs us." I stared at the message for a long time, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I didn't reply right away. I wasn't ready to give her the satisfaction of seeing me respond. But then, my phone buzzed again. It was Sean. "Why did you do that?" he asked. "I'm trying to fix my life, and you just throw me under the bus like that. You don't care about me at all." My heart sank. I could almost hear him whining through the text. He wasn't trying to fix his life. He was trying to manipulate me into bailing him out again. I typed, deleted, and then typed again. My fingers burned as I finally responded. "You don't get it, do you? I'm not doing this again. You need to take responsibility for your own life. You can't keep expecting everyone else to clean up your mess." I didn't get a reply right away. But then the phone rang. I didn't have to look at the screen to know who it was. Mom. I almost didn't pick up, but I was so tired of avoiding it. I hit accept and held the phone to my ear. "Why are you doing this?" My mother's voice was almost pleading. "This isn't how a daughter behaves. I raised you better than this." I clenched my jaw, feeling my body tense. "No, Mom. You raised me to be a backup plan, to fix everyone else's problems. But I'm done. I'm not going to keep paying for Sean's mistakes. He needs to grow up and face the consequences of his actions." "You're being unreasonable," she snapped. "You think your father and I want to beg you for help? We don't want to, but what else can we do? Your brother is struggling. We need you." "And what about me?" I shot back. "What about the sacrifices I've made? What about the money I've already given you? When do I get to stop being the one who fixes everything?" "Don't be like this. Please. This isn't just about money. It's about family. It's about doing what's right." I squeezed my eyes shut, letting out a shaky breath. What's right is letting him face the consequences. You can't keep enabling him like this. It's not healthy for any of us. "Your father is upset too. You're hurting him by doing this," she said quietly. I froze at that. For a moment, I considered backing down, just to keep the peace. I knew how much my father hated conflict, But then I remembered what had happened the last time I backed down. I couldn't keep sacrificing my happiness just to keep the peace. Not anymore. "I'm not changing my mind," I said firmly. "You need to figure this out on your own." The line went quiet for a few seconds before my mom sighed heavily. "I can't believe you're doing this. You're ruining everything." I hung up before she could say anything else. My stomach twisted as I stared at the phone, still pressed against my ear. I felt like I'd just set a bomb off in the middle of my family and walked away without looking back. The next day, the anger kept simmering. It wasn't enough to make me regret what I'd said, but I couldn't shake the guilt. Maybe I had been too harsh. Maybe I should have tried to reason with them more. But deep down, I knew I'd made the right choice. They were the ones who had crossed the line, not me. Then came the calls. My dad called me later that evening, sounding different than he usually did. "I don't understand why you're being like this," he said, his voice full of frustration. "You know we don't have much of a choice. Sean's education is important, and you're his sister. You should want to help him." "Dad, I've helped him enough," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm not his bank. I'm not his caretaker. You both need to stop enabling him and let him figure things out on his own." "You don't care about your family," he muttered. "That's all you're doing, hurting your family." I wanted to scream at him, but I knew that wouldn't help. "I'm trying to do what's best for him. If you keep paying for his mistakes, he'll never learn." The conversation ended shortly after that, with no resolution. But by the time I put my phone down, I was exhausted, physically, emotionally. I was trying to do the right thing, but it felt like the weight of my entire family was on my shoulders, pressuring me to give in. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, looking at my phone. The silence between us was heavy. It was then that I realized there was only one way to get my point across. No more trying to be the good daughter, no more letting them guilt trip me into doing what they wanted. It was time for the truth to be known, time to expose everything for what it was. I wasn't going to let them manipulate me anymore. I knew exactly what I had to do. I sat there for hours, my thumb hovering over the screen, my mind racing. The decision had already been made. There was no turning back now. I had gathered everything, receipts, bank statements, email confirmations. Everything was ready to be sent. My heart pounded as I finally hit post and shared the truth about my brother's tuition payments and his complete disregard for the help I had given him. I didn't know what I was expecting, but the rush of relief that followed was immediate. I had done something that needed to be done. The words were out in the world, and now there was no denying them. I leaned back against the couch, staring at my phone, my mind racing. It didn't take long for the messages to start flooding in. My social media notifications went wild. My phone buzzed every few seconds with likes, comments, and shares. Some people were supportive, others were calling me heartless, saying I should have just helped out. But what struck me the most was how many people were commenting with their own similar experiences, stories of family members who were entitled or lazy, and how they had to make the same difficult decisions. It felt good to see I wasn't alone, but the weight of it still lingered. And then my parents called. My mom's name flashed on the screen, and I felt a cold rush of dread settle in my stomach. I hesitated but answered anyway, bracing myself for the explosion I knew was coming. "Why would you do this?" Her voice was sharp, trembling with anger. "Why would you air our business like this? You're humiliating the family." I could feel my pulse racing. "I'm not humiliating anyone. I'm telling the truth." "You don't get it, do you?" she snapped. "This isn't about the money, it's about family. You're supposed to be there for us, and instead, you've turned your back. You're the one making this public. You're the one making everyone look bad." I clenched my jaw, my hands shaking with frustration. "I've been there for you, Mom. I've been there for Sean. I paid for his tuition last year. You never held him accountable. And now, you're asking me to do it again. No more. I'm done being the one who cleans up everyone else's mess." "Don't be so dramatic," she said, her voice tinged with disbelief. "You're hurting your father. You're hurting Sean. We raised you better than this." You raised me to be a doormat? I shot back. You raised me to pick up the pieces every time someone else messed up. And I'm done with it. Sean is an adult now. He needs to grow up. You can't keep expecting me to fix things for him. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could hear her trying to compose herself, but the tension was unbearable. I can't believe you'd do this to us. You're ruining everything. I'm not ruining anything, I replied, my voice steady. I'm finally standing up for myself. You and Dad are so focused on Sean's potential that you're willing to ignore everything I've done for him. It's not fair, and I won't keep going along with it. Before she could respond, the phone buzzed again. I looked at the screen, and I felt my heart skip a beat. It was a message from Sean. "Why the hell would you do this?" he wrote. "You think I'm some kind of loser? You think I don't care? You're just as bad as Mom. You've never supported me. You don't even care about my future." I almost laughed at the audacity of it. "You don't care about your future, Sean?" I typed back, my fingers moving faster than I could think. "You care about avoiding responsibility and using other people to clean up your mess. I'm not doing it anymore. I've already paid for you. I'm done enabling your laziness." Before I could even breathe, my phone rang again. It was my dad this time. "Are you proud of yourself?" His voice was quiet, but I could hear the hurt behind it. "This isn't how we raised you. You're turning your back on your family." "Dad, I'm not turning my back. I'm just refusing to be treated like a safety net. You keep letting Sean fail, and you keep asking me to bail him out. I'm not doing it anymore." "I thought you were better than this," he said softly, his disappointment evident in every word. "Maybe you should have taught Sean better," I responded, my voice cutting through the silence. "Maybe you should have taught him how to be responsible instead of relying on everyone else to do the hard work for him." The silence on the other end was thick, like he didn't know what to say to that. "I can't believe you're doing this," he repeated. "I can't believe you're airing our business for everyone to see." "I'm not airing anyone's business," I said, feeling the heat rise in my chest. "I'm telling the truth. If you don't like it, maybe it's time to take a look at how you've been treating me." The line went quiet again. I could tell he was trying to find the right words, but there was nothing left to say. The truth had already been said. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the fact that I had finally chosen myself over them. I wasn't going to be their backup plan anymore. By the time the phone call stopped, the post had been shared hundreds of times. Strangers were commenting, offering support, and sharing their own stories. It was overwhelming, but it was also exactly what I needed. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one holding everything together. I wasn't the one trying to fix things. I was free. I sat back on my couch, the tension draining from my body as I watched the notifications pile up. I had no idea what my parents would say next, but I didn't care anymore. For once, I was putting myself first. And just like that, I knew there was no going back. I wasn't their daughter who could be manipulated into doing whatever they wanted. I was my own person, and this was my fight. The days after I posted, everything felt surreal. I had expected a storm of backlash, but the support was overwhelming. People I didn't even know were reaching out to tell me they understood, that they'd been in my shoes before. They shared their own stories of family members who took advantage of them, of parents who refused to hold their children accountable, just like mine. It felt like a weight had been lifted off my chest, but it also left me with an emptiness. I hadn't expected to feel this relieved. But then came the fallout. My parents didn't call me for a couple of days. At first, I thought maybe they were processing everything. Maybe they were reflecting on how they had treated me. But when I saw my mom's name flash up on my phone screen, I felt my stomach drop. I took a deep breath and answered. "I've never been so ashamed of you." My mom's voice came through, sharp and full of disappointment. "You've humiliated us, and I can't believe you'd do something so vile to your own family." I closed my eyes for a moment, steadying myself. "I didn't humiliate anyone, Mom. I told the truth. Maybe if you and Dad had done the same, I wouldn't have had to." "You've ruined Sean's future," she continued, the words hitting me like daggers. He's going to be so upset when he sees what you've done. I could hear the familiar edge of panic in her voice, the kind that had always been used to manipulate me. You really think Sean cares about anything other than getting a free pass? I asked, my voice calm but firm. He's not interested in his future. He's only interested in other people fixing his mistakes. I'm done being the person who cleans up after him. Why can't you just help him? He's your brother. He's struggling, and you're abandoning him when he needs you the most, my mom said, her voice wavering with emotion. Mom, I didn't abandon him. I gave him every chance I had. I paid for his tuition once, and he didn't even try. I'm not doing it again. He needs to learn that he's responsible for his own life. And so do you. The silence on the other end of the line was thick. I don't know what happened to you. You used to be so caring, so selfless. You've turned into someone else. Someone I don't even recognize. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her she was the one who had changed me, that her constant manipulation had pushed me to this point. But instead, I took a deep breath. Maybe you're right. Maybe I've changed. But that doesn't mean I'm wrong. She hung up abruptly, and for a moment I just stared at the phone, unsure of what to feel. Anger, relief, sadness. It was all a mix of emotions, but mostly it was clarity. I had done the right thing. My parents would never understand that, but I didn't need them to. The next few days were quieter. My dad didn't call. He never did when things got tough. He just retreated into his silence. I knew he was upset, but he was too passive to confront me directly. It was easier for him to avoid the conflict than to deal with it head on. I wasn't going to chase him down. Sean, on the other hand, didn't waste any time reaching out. His first message was full of anger and accusations, calling me every name in the book. You're just a selfish bitch who never cared about me, he said, followed by a string of messages blaming me for his failures. You think I'm lazy? You think I don't care about my future? Well, screw you. I don't need your help anyway. I read through them all, but I didn't respond. I knew that if I engaged with him, it would only drag me back into the toxic cycle. Instead, I blocked him. For the first time in years, I didn't feel guilty about it. I didn't owe him anything anymore. Then came the second round of calls. My mom, trying to manipulate me again. You can't just ignore your family, she said, her voice softer now, like she was trying to coax me back. You've broken us, and I just want you to realize what you've done. Mom, I said, my voice steady, I'm not going to feel guilty about this. I've been nothing but patient, nothing but understanding, and it's never been enough. I don't want to be part of a family that doesn't respect me. I'm not a backup plan for everyone else's failures. There was a long pause before she finally spoke again, this time more quietly. I don't know who you are anymore. I'm the person you made me, I replied, my voice firm. I'm the person who was always expected to fix things, to sacrifice everything for everyone else, but not anymore. I'm done. After that, the calls stopped. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was constantly at the mercy of their guilt trips. The silence was deafening, but it was also freeing. I didn't feel the need to explain myself anymore. I wasn't the villain in this story. They were. A few weeks later, I received a message from a distant cousin. She'd seen the post, and she reached out to tell me she understood what I had done. She had been through something similar with her own family. I was surprised at how much it meant to me to hear from someone who wasn't wrapped up in the drama. It was a simple, kind message, but it made all the difference. The final nail in the coffin came when I ran into a friend I hadn't seen in years. We grabbed coffee, and she mentioned how her family had been talking about me. They said your parents were so upset about what you did, she said, pausing, but they also said they respected you for standing up for yourself. They said they wished they had the courage to do the same with their own families. I couldn't help but laugh. It was a bittersweet moment. My parents' shame had become my triumph. The world was seeing me for who I really was, and I was finally okay with that. I hadn't spoken to my parents in months, and honestly, it didn't hurt anymore. They were still my family, but I wasn't the person I used to be. I was someone who had finally learned how to put herself first. I knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter in my life, one where I made my own rules. I didn't need their approval anymore. And that, in itself, was the greatest victory.